It's my great pleasure to introduce the next panel. Dr. Murid Partaw, lecturer from the School of Interdisciplinary and Global Studies at the University of South Florida, Tampa, a former senior government official. Dr. Partaw's most recent position was Afghanistan's senior national representative to the US Central Command. Maisam Nazary, head of the Foreign Relations for the National Resistance Front of Afghanistan and is currently senior advisor to Daoud Naji. He's also a historian and teacher. Daoud Naji, head of the Afghan Freedom Front Political Committee, previously served as a senior political advisor to the Afghan National Security Council, previously working as a BBC radio journalist for the World Service for over 14 years. And Dr. Munazza Ebtikar, fellow at Princeton School of Public and International Affairs and a member of the advisory board of the Mosaic Foundation. May I invite him to the table?
So Mr. Partaw is not here today. I am taking over to moderate this panel. Each member has about 10 minutes. And let's stick to the time. I'm just going to go through a little bit more of introducing our members. We are going to start the panel with Mr. Nazary. Nazary is currently the National Resistance Front Foreign Relations Head and Senior Advisor to Daoud Naji. He's also a historian and researcher. His main areas of focus at the moment is the history of Islam, history of Central Asia and South Asia, nationalism, nation building and ethnic conflict or other research interests that he has. Mr. Nazary double majored in political science and Iranian studies at UCLA and graduated in 2012. He was also a research assistant at UCLA's political science department during his last year there. Afterwards, he attended the London School of Economics for his master's degree and was awarded a master's degree in comparative politics and nationalism and ethnic conflict in 2013. His dissertation topic was the role of ethnic politics in Afghanistan from 1978 to 2001. Since 2013, he has actively been involved in Afghanistan's politics and simultaneously was a board member and a director at the Massoud Foundation, a charitable organization. The floor is yours, Mr. Nazary.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues, let me begin with expressing my deepest gratitude to the organizers of this conference today, the Cambridge Massoud Conference, the Global Mosaic Foundation, and my dear friend, Mr. Nashat. It is a privilege to speak at one of the world's great centers of learning about an issue that carries immense importance not only for Afghanistan, but also for international peace and security. Article 51 of the United Nations Charter clearly affirms the inherent right of individual or collective self-defense if an armed attack occurs. The Taliban seizure of Afghanistan in 2021 was not the result of elections or a peaceful transfer of power. It was an armed coup enabled by terrorism and, unfortunately, foreign intervention. Since then, their campaign of mass killings, the repression of women, and the persecution of ethnic and religious groups has amounted to a continuous arms assault on the population of Afghanistan. The National Resistance Front of Afghanistan represents the legitimate exercise of the people of Afghanistan's right to defend themselves against an armed aggressor. The United Nations General Assembly, through Resolution 2625 of 1970, affirms the right of all peoples to freely determine their political status without external coercion. Resolution 3314 of 1974 goes further, recognizing the legitimacy of people's struggle by all available means, including armed struggle, against colonial domination, foreign occupation, and racist regimes. The Taliban today embody precisely this illegitimacy, an unelected terrorist entity that denies women education, bans civil liberties, and rules through foreign-sponsored extremism. Under international law and moral principle, the people of Afghanistan's armed resistance is not only justified, it is protected. The Taliban systematically violate nearly every article of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights: freedom and dignity, non-discrimination, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, and the right to education. They enforce gender apartheid by excluding women and girls from education, work, and public life, a policy that scholars now classify as a crime against humanity under the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. Faced with such systematic crimes, armed resistance is not a preference, it is a duty of survival. International humanitarian law recognizes armed struggles for self-determination. Article 1 of Additional Protocol of 1977 extends protection of peoples fighting against colonial domination, alien occupation, and racist regimes. Liberation movements that abide by humanitarian law gain combatant and prisoner of war status. The National Resistance Front of Afghanistan, including other resistance groups such as the AFF, with its organization, command structure, and adherence to humanitarian norms, qualifies as such a liberation movement. Our resistance is therefore legally recognized by international law. The people of Afghanistan did not rush to arms. Basically, our resistance today started as a defense mechanism in 2021. For 20 years, we embraced democracy, elections, freedom of speech, and international cooperation. Yet in 2021, the world abandoned us. The Taliban terrorist group seized power by force, extinguishing all peaceful avenues for change, when every door to peaceful remedy is shut and people are subjected to continuous arms assault. Resistance by force is legitimate. Nonviolent struggle requires a civic space. It requires a regime that values legitimacy, fears shame, and depends on international trade and reputation. That was the case of India under the rule of Great Britain and in South Africa under apartheid. But the Taliban, like ISIS, glorified violence. They do not seek legitimacy. They thrive on domination. Under their rule, protests are crushed, activists are tortured, and women are silenced. There is no international protection for Afghanistan's civil society. Without armed resistance, peaceful activism is in reality a suicide. The Taliban-ruled Afghanistan is once again a sanctuary for international terrorism. There is a myriad of regional and global terror networks thriving in Taliban-occupied Afghanistan today. The NRF's resistance is therefore not only an internal conflict, it is the continuation of the global fight against terrorism. Therefore, in such a conflict, non-violence means is futile. Only sticking to non-violence means and civic or civil resistance. How are we supposed to fight terrorism, fight ISIS, fight Al-Qaeda, fight the TTP, Ansarullah, and the Taliban terrorist groups with non-violent means? When they come attack us, they take our land, our homes, our property, take our rights, our inalienable rights, basically facing genocidal groups like these terror and criminal networks. There is no other method except to pursue armed resistance, and to defend ourselves. History teaches us that tyranny rarely collapses on its own. Freedom has been won through resistance. Europe against Nazism and fascism, Africa against apartheid, Asia against colonial rule. Just as the French resistance resisted Nazi occupation, just as South Africans fought apartheid, the people of Afghanistan today resist Taliban, terror, and tyranny. Their cause is no less just and legitimate. Where nonviolence has been met with massacre, whether in Nazi-occupied Europe, Syria, Myanmar, armed resistance became the only path to survival. Afghanistan is no different than any of these other conflicts and countries. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, the armed resistance of the National Resistance Front of Afghanistan and other resistance groups that are present inside the country is not a war of choice. It is a war of necessity, a defense of life, liberty, dignity against an illegitimate terrorist group. International law, UN principles, the Geneva Conventions, and the very lessons of history converge on a single truth. When a people are subjugated to terror, by terror, stripped of their rights and abandoned by the world, they are justified in taking up arms to secure freedom. And as the Holy Quran declares in Surah Al-Hajj, permission to fight has been given to those who are being fought, because they were wrong, and indeed the Almighty is competent to grant them victory. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a quick side note, and it's no way an invitation to leave this panel. There are two side events going on. One starts at 10 and at 11:30. It's about women. The other one, 12:30 to 1:45 something. It's another 45 minutes. It's about civil society. Both these events are happening in the boardroom. So our next speaker for this panel is Mr. Naji. He is an Afghan Hazara politician, political activist, and journalist. He served as a senior political advisor to the Afghan National Security Council under the former government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. Before he joined the government, he was a senior leader of the Enlightenment movement of Afghanistan and the Tabassum movement. Naji has previously been a BBC radio journalist and worked for BBC World Service for 14 years. And as of September 2024, he serves as the head of the political committee of the Afghan Freedom Front. The floor is yours, Mr. Naji.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to take this opportunity, first of all, to thank my friend, Dr. Zalmay Nishad, and his colleagues at the Mosaic Foundation for creating this wonderful opportunity to sit together and react on both our present and our future, and as well as for his effort for making acceptable and wonderful roadmap, which is very important for our future, especially. So I would like to say that I'm here to share the Afghanistan International Freedom Front view and perspective with you. But before that, I just want to mention that I'm very happy that Afghanistan Freedom Front is already shared their perspectives about
Their manifesto,
the roadmap, and we are a part of them.
In the 6 initial roadmaps that we had,
We try to be, because it is very important for us to have a roadmap before any other changes in Afghanistan. Because the experience of 1990 mentioned to us to be careful about that. But right before that, I'd like to, and we have to thinking about the present, because now Taliban pushed Afghanistan in a very deep and multi-dimensional crisis. So how we have to move forward. Over the past 4 years, as the Taliban has pushed Afghanistan into a deep and multi-dimensional crisis, one question has always come up: what should we do with the Taliban? Should we negotiate with them, or should we resist against them? Honestly, I don't fully agree with putting the question this way, because it's not simply black and white. They talking or fighting are not goals on their own. Talking and fighting, they just choose to reach a goal. So that means we may need both of them, depending on the situation. In fact, in an article I wrote this August for the Afghanistan International website, I asked a similar question about talking with the Taliban, but in a bit different way. My question was, is there really anyone on the other side of the table to talk to? This question is important because dialogue only makes sense if there is a real partner on the other side. A side is ready to listen, to compromise, and to recognize the rights of others. That's why when we speak about talking or fighting, we need to be clear. The real issue is not about sitting at the table, but about having someone across that table who is truly ready to engage in a meaningful way. Now I'm asking you, again, dear participant, is there really someone on the other side of the table ready to talk? Do the Taliban truly support a national dialogue? For finding the right answer for this question, let's look at the past to see how the Taliban have approached on a national level. As someone who reported Afghanistan news and issues on the BBC since 2002 till 2015, I remember that the government of Afghanistan Islamic Republic since 2005 started to call the Taliban to come and negotiate. For the first time, it was in 2005. The Islamic Republic of Afghanistan set up a peace commission led by Mr. Zabhatullah Mujahideen, the former president of Afghanistan. This commission and others, led by prominent figures like another former president, Mr. Burhanuddin Rabbani, the vice president, Mr. Karim Khalili, and the last thing, Abdullah, who still proudly carries the title, worked on peace until the public fell. To encourage the Taliban, thousands of their prisoners were released. They were given land and cash. And President Hamid Karzai even called them warriors. But what was the Taliban response? In Doha, after the negotiation, long negotiation, and finally the agreement with the United States, the Afghanistan negotiation team was over there, staying in the same hotel as the Taliban. Everything was ready for a national dialogue. But the Taliban still refused to meet with the Afghanistan negotiation team. Over the past 4 years, many efforts have been made to start a dialogue. The United Nations tried and continue to try. The United States Special Representative of Afghanistan, the Europe countries' special representative, and regional countries each did their part. And yet, why was not even a single initial meeting held where the Taliban and the opposition could sit face to face? Was the opposition unwilling, or did the Taliban simply refuse to come to the table? We all know that over the past 4 years, there has been a strong support for dialogue among the opposition, among the Afghanistan political figures, and among the civil society activists and women rights defenders. But then, why has no serious dialogue ever taken place? When we witnessed in Doha process, in the past 4 years, there were 3 or 4 round meetings between the Taliban and the representative of the Western countries and the regional countries. But the moment that idea of the face-to-face talk between the Taliban and the opposition came up, the Taliban rejected. They would not even agree to sit across the table from the representative of the Afghanistan civil society last year. Because of the time, I have to make it short. And the Freedom Front, we know that Taliban have not changed, and they did not change. Because Taliban is not a political group, a political party. They are an ideological group. They not change themselves, even they want to allow the society to do not change. Look at the last order of the Mullah Haibatullah about the Institute. Look at the orders of the Taliban about the people here, the styles, the women, and everything. So Taliban did not change. But I want to keep asking from some of the authorities and some of the officials, the former officials of the Afghanistan Republic, or our partners, international partners around the world, who, as a sudden, changed their tunes. What's happened exactly? How it's possible that the Al-Qaeda and ISIS labeled as a terrorist, but Taliban seems different. Meanwhile, we all know there is no difference between the Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Taliban. They are brother, and ideologically they are supporting each other. Even if of this so-called war between the Daesh, ISIS, and Taliban, even if it's true, it's just fight for more power, nothing more. Finally, The fighting against Taliban is not new, and it's not started on 2021. Fighting against Taliban is go back to the 1990s. The people of Afghanistan fight against the Taliban at that time for their freedom, for their life. That time as well. And this struggle never stopped. All through the 20 years of the Republican, the war was going on. And it was for a better future, it was for democracy, it was for gender equality, and for all the values that Afghanistan and all international community needed for a better society. My final words. We understand the situation of the international community and the regional countries about the Taliban, because they somewhat shielded from the harm of the Taliban. It is Afghanistan women who deprived from all of their rights. It is Afghanistan nation who completely isolation from the international community, not other nations, not other countries. So it's understandable for us. And finally, and the Freedom Front, we believe that fighting for our freedom, fighting for our future, and is our duty, not others. It's our job, not others. And we have to do it. And we have to stand for our future, for our freedom, and for our humanity. Thank you very much. And we will do it.
Now we're going to have Dr. Munazza Ebtikar. She completed her PhD from St. John's College, University of Oxford, and she focused on war and memory in Afghanistan. Her research, supported by prestigious grants, examined how members of Afghanistan's diverse communities narrate their complex past and define their identities. Her work not only contributes to the academic discourse of the country.
Hello. First, I would like to express my gratitude. It's such an honor to be here today and see a lot of familiar faces and faces that I am seeing in person. I extend my gratitude to Mr. Zalmay Nishat and the entire Mosaic team for organizing this event. Having just arrived from the United States yesterday, I can attest that the kind of open political environment that exists here in the UK differs from what is currently taking place in the US, where scholars, practitioners, and advocates often find themselves under surveillance for their statements and face censorship when attempting to speak candidly about complex issues that the world is facing now. When it comes to Afghanistan specifically, the academic and policy climate has become such that perspectives aligning with the United States foreign policy objectives are often the only ones deemed acceptable in mainstream discourse. This reality makes forums such as today's particular forum very important. So with that said, I will turn to the substance of my remarks today. So the excellent speakers of this panel, they represented and spoken about armed resistance and the legitimacy of armed resistance, yet we know that during this time, there is less appetite for armed resistance even when it is justified for self-defense. We recognize that armed resistance is often legitimized only when it emanates from the state and serves Western interests or the convenience of powerful actors. While I would like to contribute to this conversation alongside my co-panelists, I will center not only the leaders, I will center not the leaders and well-known personalities of armed resistance groups, as has traditionally been the case in such prestigious gatherings, nor those who advocate on behalf of their supporters, but rather I would like to center the everyday person in Afghanistan. So what is remarkably overlooked in academic literature and underappreciated in policy spaces are the unarmed resistance practices taking place under the Taliban's authoritarianism. So I'm asking, what are the sentiments of the regular student, of the farmer, of the taxi driver, of the fruit seller regarding what is taking place in their country under the Taliban? And how do we come to understand this better? We are witnesses to it, we comprehend it, but how do we make the intangible tangible? Well, first, we must establish what resistance means and its diverse manifestations. While an elaborate theoretical description extends beyond the limitations of my time, I will briefly note that aside from organized collective resistance, such as revolution, guerrilla warfare, and civil warfare, there exists everyday resistance that may be clandestine, disguised, or involve very trivial shifts in practices that may not directly be presented as political acts. And this builds on the work of Judith Butler and Asif Bayat. So these strands of theorization point to the relationship between resistance and power, highlighting in particular the type of resistance enacted and its impact depends on the form of power in which it is embedded. More recent conceptualization of resistance also emphasize the significance of affect, agency, temporalities, and open up cracks to undermine domination, yet without always achieving complete liberation. So there is a need to expand our understanding of what constitutes resistance, paying attention to its contextualized and situated nature, which also highlights the partial and fragmented nature of power. This understanding becomes particularly salient when we examine how resistance is actually conceptualized within Afghanistan's linguistic and cultural frameworks. So what is the etymology of resistance, especially in Afghanistan? In the Persian language, resistance is popularly translated as muqawmat. When we say muqawmat, it carries its own charged meaning, its own history, and its own knowledge tradition. In official terms and in collective memory from within Afghanistan, muqawmat refers to the era of the fight against the Taliban in the 1990s. It has become particularly salient today with the emergence of resistance groups such as the National Resistance Front, which has emerged in the regions where muqawmat in the 1990s was strongest in those particular areas. So this raises another important question. What are other instances of resistance to outside tyrannical powers not considered eras of muqawmat? For example, during the Anglo-Afghan Wars, within Afghanistan, within the tradition, the fight against is considered as the era of jihad, as was the war against the Soviets. It's not considered the era of muqawmat, it's considered as the era of jihad. The reason for this is because jihad, when it is termed jihad, you are fighting against the enemy that has a religious dimension. Now, however, it really doesn't, as the Taliban claim religiosity. So here, in the local vernacular, we are in the era of muqawmat-e-dawla, or the second resistance. The emphasis on this continuity is very important because unlike the timelines imposed by outside narratives that mark definitive ends and beginnings of wars in Afghanistan, society does not function in such discrete temporal categories. In Afghanistan, the end of the first war against the Taliban did not conclude with a clear endpoint. The war simply continued with new elements to build on what Mr. Daoud Naji said. So the historical memory and experiences remain vivid of the fight against the Taliban in the 1990s. The war against the Taliban, we know, did not commence in 2021 when they assumed power. It has been going on for more than 30 years. While they may represent new elements in the psyche of collective memory, the bloodshed, violence, and experiences remain fresh, and the language used to understand this reality reflects this continuity. And we know that not all forms of resistance have to be organized, open, and institutionalized, especially given the the country's current political climate. At face value, many may interpret the absence of open political conflict or mass protests against the Taliban as an indication of the Taliban's popularity. However, resistance by common citizens does not necessarily require membership in organized political opposition groups. Resistance does not always appear as coherent opposition or heroic subversion. It is ambivalent, fragmented, and entangled with the very forms of power that it resists. So unlike armed resistance groups, where the end goals are very clear, it ranges from replacing the Taliban to modifying their behavior, implementing reforms, or carving out autonomous spaces. The everyday person may not have explicit end goals, but they do harbor grievances and sentiments that manifest in various forms of resistance. So for these groups, everyday resistance involves continuing their survival activities while opposing state intervention in their livelihoods. The dynamics of nonviolent action against the Taliban cannot be explained without attention to these groups, the subaltern, and the ways in which they articulate their demands. So what are some of these manifestations? So what are some examples of it? So some examples could be composing poetry, in the words of Professor Suzanne Olszewska, who's here with us today. Poetry in Afghanistan reveals as it conceals. Boycotting Taliban endorsed activities is another form of resistance. Defection and resignations from official positions. Leaving the country as a form of resistance. Using Persian metaphors, imagery, and language as a means of cultural resistance. Clandestine learning and education, especially by young women, is a form of resistance. Preserving books that have been censored by the Taliban is a form of resistance. Avoiding all contact with members of the regime is a form of resistance. But beyond these cultural and political forms, economic resistance manifests through informal economies, so strategic boycotts of Taliban-endorsed businesses and the refusal to pay certain taxes or fees. These survival strategies become inherently political acts when they challenge state authority over economic life. The transformation of necessity into resistance demonstrates how these everyday survival itself becomes a form of political opposition. So resistance in urban areas, such as Kabul and Mazar, has assumed a covert and strategic character. Urban cells, often composed of former Afghan National Defense and Security Forces personnel, intellectuals, and civil society activists, engage in acts of sabotage, disseminate anti-Taliban messaging, and organize civil disobedience campaigns. In Kabul, these groups have disrupted Taliban communication networks, staged public demonstrations advocating for the rights of women, and distributed underground publications challenging the Taliban's authority. So in a country devastated by nearly half a century of wars, commemorations have also become powerful spaces for political expression. For example, the funeral for Muhammad Agha, killed by Taliban members, this funeral took place in Panjshir's Annobad district in late 2021. It shows us how even mourning, or spaces of mourning and funeral, and spaces where you mourn and commemorate those who have passed, become spaces for resistance. So Armahan Malikzada, who's a women's educator and activist, after this funeral that was held in Annobad, she gets up in front of the gathering of people, and she first positions herself with an Islamic discourse. Addressing the crowd, she says, if today they tell us that in Panjshir you are a mujahid, and then your wife comes and speaks, then yes, you become even more of a mujahid. And she challenged Taliban's religious authority by claiming, just as Islam was sourced from Saudi Arabia, so in Afghanistan it was sourced from this valley of lines. And she says this in front of dozens of male attendees and members of the Taliban. Members of the Taliban remained silent, but the male attendees applauded what she was saying. However, this event, which was documented and was posted on YouTube, it was pulled down by members of the Taliban. I'm saying this because just last week in Sacramento, California, I attended a commemoration event of the martyrs that have passed in Afghanistan. And there, We had participants who cited Malikzade's defiance during the annual commemorations, and this demonstrates how resistance practices continue across transnational spaces while it continues to also have connections to the homeland. So my other question is, to what extent do the activities of civil resistance complement armed resistance? And this question requires theoretical considerations. So what I say is, it is protests, boycotts, and the creation of alternative institutions that increase political pressure. More importantly, we remember from historical precedent that if armed resistance is to be sustained, plans must be established for what a transformed reality should entail. It is the everyday resistors, in fact, which create the alternative institutions. And these alternative institutions, which I have, the various activities which I have mentioned, provide the social infrastructure necessary for sustained resistance while creating parallel governance structures that challenge Taliban's authority. And this is the approach that has potential to disrupt the status quo and can actually erode the authority of the Taliban. And we know that this has been expanded. I won't go into theoretical bits. So armed resistance without societal transformation would lead to further failure. Just as interventions cannot be imposed from above, armed resistance will not achieve substantial outcomes without the thinkers and creators who can construct the radical future sought. So I will skip the international community bit, but in conclusion, we recognize that resistance in its diverse manifestations exists. It's not resistant. This is resistance not with the end goal of top-down armed resistance, but bottom-up transformation where necessary societal change must occur. We understand these phenomena, and too often what we Afghans understand, we bear the burden of making tangible and comprehensible to Western audiences. I would love to continue this conversation over Q&A, but I have a lot to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Now I'm going to open this for questions from yourselves. I do have, yes please, Ahmar.
A quick comment on the use of terminologies, because you used the word Anglo-Afghan War. I don't know if it's a transported terminology, because the local literature does not talk about that particular events of resistance against the English forces in that terms, because the Jang or war does not carry positive meaning in Persian literature, comparing to Maqamat or Qiyam, which has more positive connotation. The interesting thing is when you review international literature on resistance history in Afghanistan, you might face a kind of differential treatment of the resistance against the Soviet invasion, calling it jihad, and the resistance against Anglo-English invasion as a war, which is very interesting because we are historians, and it's really important that we kind of promote local terminology. So I'm quoting a Khukandi source from Mullah Miyaz Muhammad Muntakhab Tawarikh, and when he talks about the war, he says Qiyami Mardumi Tajik wa Afghan dar maqabil Inglis, particularly referring to what happened in Charikar and all those areas, the resistance against the British forces. So it's really important for us to take into consideration that element. About the resistance, my observation of the media presence of both the resistance fronts shows that the resistance fronts is not just interested in armed resistance against the Taliban, but it looks like they are culturally also resisting by talking about the linguistic policies of the Taliban, the cultural policies of the Taliban. So I would really like to hear from you, to what extent we can connect armed resistance with other forms of resistance, because you do it in action, but I did not hear much from your presentation on that issue. It will be interesting for the audience to listen and have the opportunity to see the non-armed elements of the resistance front activities at the moment, like the cultural and the political and the linguistic aspects of the resistance, considering that Taliban is actually discriminating against the use of Persian language in governmental structures and governmental everyday governmental usages. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. That's such an important point to bring up in regards to what kind of terminology do we use in Afghanistan when we are talking about fighting against, and what are the differences in this terminology? What kind of meanings do they generate? I think that it's something that we have to work on, because when we say resistance, it's very kind of limited to what we're actually talking about. And looking back, it would be really wonderful to kind of see differences, so on and so forth. With that said, I did want to make a point about your second comment, which is what the armed resistance groups, how much support they have, or how does it complement the different types of resistance that I mentioned. From my own research, it's very apparent that some of these kind of non-violent resistance groups or individuals who are engaged in these types of activities actually support the activities of the armed resistance groups within the country. But there has to be more work done in this regard. With that said, I would
If we're talking about, for example, about war or war again, which is you said, first, as I mentioned, that the war against the war for the freedom, the war for the humanity and gender equality, discrete values, is not stopped anytime, but it's just some changes. But if we talking about everything, I'm talking about Afghanistan situation, I invite that please pay attention on the reality on the ground there in Afghanistan. I would like to ask everyone who are sitting here, especially who are not from the non-Afghan people, if any nation or any government face the same group as the Taliban, what they do? What the world did with the Nazism and fascism. And Taliban is actually the combination of Nazism and fascism. Especially if you put them and see them at the context of the Afghanistan internal conflict. So it's our duty. It is, sometimes we heard a lot about about money, or it would be dangerous for another war. So is this the situation right now? What is the choice of Afghanistan and Afghanistan people right now? I think it's clear that they kill, imprison, dehumanize, or they have to fight. I think it's not a choice, it's a moral duty.
Just to make a short comment regarding the last part of your question, or your last question, of course. When it comes to the different forms of resistance, I mostly concentrated on armed resistance, on our armed struggle over the NRF's armed wing during my remarks. Yet, based on our manifesto, based on our position, official position, we endorse and support all forms of resistance, and we're pursuing all forms of resistance. I myself am part of the political wing of the NRF, so I pursue political resistance, not military resistance, of course. And when it comes to cultural resistance, I deem it as important as military resistance. whether it's resistance through literature, resistance through different forms of art, it's as important as taking a gun and defending yourself. I wrote a post about this just 2-3 days ago, because the Taliban, terrorist group, is targeting every aspect of our identity today. It's not only a few rights that they've taken away. They've taken away everything, and they're taking away everything as every day passes. I heard something that they are banning certain books written by women yesterday and by certain authors. So as every day passes, it's getting worse. They're attacking our languages, our cultures, our heritage, our basically our traditions. And so, as every time that we see this, we've been coming out, making statements, and even showing it as action. For example, when Nowruz happens, the Persian New Year, every year we encourage people to celebrate it with extravagance, with all the traditions that it encompasses, because that itself is a form of resistance. I've done it, the leader of the resistance has done it, others who are part of the resistance have shown this. The same with music, the same with poetry, the same with other forms. So when it comes to that question, we endorse, we support, and we pursue it as much of it as we pursue political and military resistance. Thank you.
I also, just a quick mention, we do not get mention that part, the other part, as Mr. Nazary said, because every conference, especially yesterday, we have a lot of thoughtful and meaningful points and serious points from every participants about every part of it. Yeah, we do support all of them, and they are important as a famous phrasal, which is all the time, from the famous commander of Afghanistan, Massoud, is the operation for the literature. We follow it.
The operation is for our literature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it is important, as on the details Mr. Nazary mentioned.
Just because I'm aware that we need to go for a break, I know there's one question here, and then let's take 2 more questions.
Very interesting presentations. My question is to Mr. Nazary. You talked about abandonment of Afghanistan when Taliban took over second time. I'm just wondering if you can give your view after the presentation by Ms. Ebtikar, where she talks about unarmed resistance. We know that during the Republic time, more than 20 years was spent to educate Afghanistan population. And if you even look around in this room, so there are many people who have benefited in that period. And Afghanistan intellectually grew very highly in that time. So don't you think that this statement you want to kind of change, partially even? Thank you.
I actually want to emphasize on that. I believe abandonment did happen, and I have my reasons for that, for many reasons, but the one, I want to give short answers, so I can be mindful of our time. When it comes to my generation, or our generation in the room, the younger generation that you stated, we were abandoned, we were betrayed by the international community. For 20 years, we were told, go educate yourselves, go acquire skills, go acquire experience. because the Afghanistan of the future is yours, and we're going to support you. As soon as a generational shift started in Afghanistan, the international community abandoned our country. The United States started negotiating with the same terrorist and criminal network that they kept telling us they're against your values, against your principles, so prepare yourselves. And the rest of the world also followed suit. So it is, of course, an abandonment. We had hope to build a new Afghanistan in the future, but we couldn't have done it all alone. As soon as the generational shift started in Afghanistan, we faced abandonment. And now, this generation that could have stayed inside Afghanistan and built an Afghanistan for future generations, now we're all in exile. And of course, it's fortunate that we're in such institutions and we are doing research today and we're having our efforts and activities. But it would have been in the interest of Afghanistan's people and the international community if we stayed inside and we had the support of the international community. Thank you.
Can we take one question from there? And I'm sure you will meet our speakers during the break time, so you can have a one-to-one chat. Please.
Mine is very short, and it's foundation for the roadmaps. I think the essential question is, what is the need? What is the purpose of a group like the Taliban anywhere in the world in this day and age? If we're talking about power, there is so much technological advancement, both in terms of arms and in terms of communication. How come the purposes that a group like the Taliban are serving cannot be given in a more peaceful way? What are the roads and bridges that they have destroyed? What are the children that they are killing or raping? What are those things necessary? This, I think, should be addressed in the roadmaps as the necessity of such groups, not just for Afghanistan, but for the world. The same way that gender apartheid is that way. It's not just for the benefit of the women of Afghanistan, but it's worldwide. Thank you. You don't have to answer it, just keep it on because of the time.
Can I just take the last question from there and then we can end the panel with this? Thank you.
سلام، خوشحال هستم که شما ایزان از نزدیک می‌بینم. اگر باید داشته باشیم در روز اول که طالبان به قدرت رسیدن، آقای مجاهد گفت که ما نه تنها از خانم‌ها رو تشویق میکنیم بلکه حمایت میکنیم. این به جواب یک خبرنگار زن بود. اما در طول 4 سال گپ به جای رسید که امروز میگن کتابی که توسط زنان نوشته اونا دیگر قابل خواندن نیست. حتی موبایل هوشمند و اینترنت هم بالایش وضع قرار شده، یعنی قیودات. خب این کنفرانس به نظر من نه اولش هست نه آخرش می باشد. اما هر وقتی که شما کنفرانس گرفتین در افغانستان یک قیودات نآمده، تغییرات مثبت نآمده، چرا جامعه جهانی بالای طالبان فشار نمیاد؟ و اگر آقای نظری اگر روز طالبان بخواین با مخالفین خود مثلا با شما روی یک تشکیل یک دولت فراگیر به توافق برسند، آیا حاضر هستین همانطور که در پالی آقای ناجی نشستین بالای پهلوی زبیلا مجاهد هم میشینین؟ تشکر.
Our friend asked if one day your group or all of these groups enter discussions or a negotiation with the Taliban, are you willing to sit next to, I don't know which member of the terrorist group, Zabila Mujahid, are you willing to sit next to? So when it comes to this question, of course, we've stated our answer time after time. The leader of the National Resistance Front only a few days ago mentioned this. First of all, we have no hope that they will enter any type of discussions or negotiations over an inclusive, democratic Afghanistan. Today, as you may know, after 4 years, they don't accept one another. How are they going to accept the people of Afghanistan? They're deeply divided. The rift between the different factions are deepening. So if they can't accept one another, how are we going to expect them to accept 40 million citizens of Afghanistan? One. Two is, of course, and this is something that we've stated time after time, if they're willing to disarm, if they are willing to accept the will of the people of Afghanistan, if they're willing to accept democracy, yes, of course. We cherish and we accept Afghanistan's diversity. All sorts and forms of diversity. If the Taliban has a political group that is disarmed, that accepts the principle that it is the will of the people that legitimizes the government, then who are we to tell them, no, you're not part of this country? So of course I would sit next to them. But we are not optimistic that they'll reach that conclusion and they'll make that decision. That's the problem. When they can't accept one another, it's very difficult for us to even comprehend that one day we're going to be sitting next.
Thank you so much for our panelists and also for your questions. So we're going to take a break now, and you can speak with our panelists during the break. Thank you.